Some men give roses, some give promises. He gave a library, 3,000 books, 10 years of silence, and 2 letters she never once looked twice at. For 10 years, he waited in the white space between 2 initials. Some love stories begin in silence. Ours begins now. The auction hall at the ministry had been dressed for the occasion in the way only old money knows how to dress a room, without announcing the effort. Beeswax candles burned in tall silver stands along the walls. Their flames doubled in the polished obsidian of the floor, and high above, the enchanted ceiling held a clear October night, sharp with stars that did not belong to London. Someone had charmed the air to carry the faint, dry scent of cedar and old parchment, as if to remind every guest in the room that what was being sold tonight had outlived most of their grandfathers. Hermione Granger stood at the side of the dais and pressed her thumbnail very gently into the pad of her index finger, hard enough to feel it, not hard enough to leave a mark. It was a small, private discipline she had developed over the past decade, a way of pulling herself back into a room when the room threatened to become too much. She had been on her feet since 7 that morning. Her dress robes, deep wine-coloured silk, borrowed from a friend at the Prophet because her own good set had finally given up at the seams last winter, pinched at the shoulder and pulled when she breathed too deeply. Her hair had been wrestled into something resembling order, with 3 separate charms and a great deal of stubbornness. Around her neck hung the small silver pendant she always wore, a stylized owl, the emblem of the foundation, given to her by the first child the foundation had ever housed, a girl who was now 19 and studying healing at St. Mungo's. That pendant, more than the silk or the candlelight, was the reason she was here. The annual ministry charity auction was, in theory, a celebration of the wizarding world's generosity. In practice, it was a long, glittering performance in which old families paid to be photographed paying, and Hermione, as one of 3 official organisers and the public face of the War Orphans Fund, was expected to smile through every photograph as though her shoes were not slowly murdering her. 10 years. 10 years she had given to this. 10 years of fundraising letters written by hand in the quiet hours after midnight. Of negotiating with landlords who did not want children in their buildings. Of sitting beside small beds in a converted house in Hampstead, while a 6-year-old screamed himself awake from a dream he could not yet name. 10 years of small, solid work, the kind that no one wrote books about. And tonight, she stood under candlelight with a clipboard pressed to her chest like armour, and she watched the bidding climb. Lot 41, the auctioneer was saying, his voice carrying without effort across the hall. He was a tall, silver-haired wizard from Gringotts, and his diction had the unhurried polish of someone who had spent 40 years convincing the very rich to part with money. An anonymous consignment, the complete personal library of an unnamed member of one of the Sacred 28, 3,042 volumes, catalogued in full. Verified by the Department of Magical Antiquities. Opening bid, 100,000 galleons. A small, polite ripple moved through the crowd. Hermione watched the catalogue turn in 100 manicured hands. The lot had been the talk of the evening from the moment the programme had been printed. 3,000 rare books, first editions of Beadle in the original Old Mercian. A Salazar-era bestiary said to exist only in rumour. annotated copies of Agrippa in a hand that scholars would have given their teeth to identify. The estimate had been set at 1,000,000 galleons. She had thought it ambitious. 100,000, the auctioneer said. 150, 250 in the back, 300 from the floor. Hermione's eyes moved across the room without urgency. Most of the early bidding came from the visible buyers. A greengrass cousin she vaguely recognized, a stout American collector in plum velvet, the dignified shape of Lord Selwyn near the back. The numbers climbed in clean increments, the way numbers always did at the start, before their air began to thin. 500,000. Two of the visible bidders folded their paddles. 600, 750 from the gentleman on the left. By 800,000, the floor had gone quiet. The American sat back with the resigned half-smile of a man who had set himself a limit and meant to keep it. The greengrass cousin had vanished into a glass of champagne. Lord Selwyn shook his head once, almost regretfully, and crossed his arms. The auctioneer paused, listened to something through the small silver charm at his ear, and his expression did not change, but something in his posture sharpened. 900,000, he said, from a telephone bidder. A murmur moved through the room. Telephone bidder was the polite ministry euphemism for the long-range flu-connected proxies that the truly private buyers used. Wizards and witches who did not wish to be seen sitting in a room while they spent a fortune. There were two such proxies tonight, Hermione knew, standing very still at the edge of the dais, each holding a small enchanted mirror cupped in one palm. 1,000,000. The estimate met. The crowd made the small, satisfied sound a crowd makes when a record is acknowledged. 1,100,000. 1,000,002. The bidding was now entirely between the two mirrors. The hall had begun to tilt forward in the way that auction halls tilt when something rare is about to happen. Hermione realized, with a low, unhelpful jolt, that she had stopped breathing and made herself draw air through her nose. 1,500,000. She turned her head very slowly to look at the two proxies. The first was a thin, neat man in Gringotts livery, his mirror tilted toward his ear, his face composed into the particular blankness goblins required of their staff. The second was a witch in plain black robes, her grey hair pinned up, her mouth pressed into a flat, unreadable line. Hermione had seen her before, at 3 or 4 previous auctions. She had never learned her name. 1,700,000. A woman in the third row put a hand to her throat. 1,000,008. 1,000,009. 2,000,000 galleons, said the auctioneer, and the hall went so quiet that Hermione could hear the candle in the stand nearest her pop softly as a moth caught its wing in the wax. The grey-haired witch lifted her mirror very slightly. Her lips moved. The auctioneer inclined his head. 2,100,000. A long pause. The thin man in livery murmured into his glass. He listened. He murmured again. The auctioneer waited with the patience of a clock. 2,100,000, he said again quietly, for the complete library, going once. Hermione realized her clipboard was pressed so tightly against her ribs that she could feel the metal clip through the silk. She loosened her grip with deliberate care. Going twice. The thin man in Gringotts livery lowered his mirror. He gave the auctioneer a single, courteous shake of the head. "Sold," said the auctioneer. for 2,100,000 galleons to the anonymous bidder represented by Madame Pyrites on behalf of the Foundation for the Children of the War. For one strange suspended second, Hermione did not understand the words. Then she did. The hall erupted into applause. Someone cheered, and someone else laughed in the bright, startled way people laugh when good fortune has fallen into a room without warning. 2 million galleons. 2 million. To her foundation, to the cramped office in Hampstead, and the small beds and the children whose names she knew by heart. 2 million galleons in a single lot, given by a stranger for her work. She felt the room recede as though someone had drawn a soft curtain between her and it. The clapping became a muffled tide. A photographer's flash went off, and she did not flinch. Her face arranged itself by long practice into something gracious and surprised and warm, the face she wore for the donors at the end of every gala. But underneath it, her mind had gone very still and very fast at the same time, the way it used to in the war when a curse had been cast, and she was already 3 countercharms ahead before she knew she had moved. 2 million galleons. Anonymous. Why anonymous? Who in this country has 2 million galleons of liquid capital to spend on books in a single evening? There are perhaps 12 such families. Of those 12, how many would root through Madame Pyrites, who only takes private commissions, who only... Miss Granger. The auctioneer was beside her now, his hand under her elbow, with the discreet, steadying touch of a man who had seen many recipients of windfalls go very slightly white in public. If you would be so good, the handover ceremony, the buyer, as is traditional with lots of this size, will present in person. She turned her head to him. Tonight? Now, said the auctioneer gently. He is already in the building. He. Something in the way he said the pronoun, something in the careful, neutral pleasantness of his expression, the expression of a man who had been told a name and had been instructed to behave as though he had not been told it. Hermione walked to the centre of the dais. The applause had not yet subsided. The candles dipped and steadied along the walls. Someone, Kingsley perhaps, in his official capacity, was speaking warmly into a charmed amplifier about the generosity of the wizarding world, about the Foundation's work, about the children whose lives this gift would change. She did not hear him. She was watching the great double doors at the back of the hall. The doors were still closed. The brass handles caught the candlelight. Beyond them, she knew, was the long marble corridor, and beyond that, the grand antechamber where the highest bidders waited in a private salon while the formalities concluded. She had walked that corridor herself, 3 hours earlier, in shoes that had not yet begun to hurt. She watched the handles. Madame Pyrites had stepped down from the dais and was now standing beside the doors, her grey head tilted, her thin hand resting on the carved frame. She was waiting for a signal. The auctioneer raised one finger, almost casually, and Madame Pyrites turned and pushed the right-hand door open. The corridor beyond was lit by torchlight, warmer than the hall, and for a moment all Hermione could see was the silhouette of a man framed in the doorway, tall, narrow-shouldered, very still. He was wearing dark robes cut in a style that was not quite English, the collar high and unornamented, no house ring visible on either hand. His hair, which the candlelight caught the moment he stepped forward, was so pale it looked almost colourless against the dark wool. he took one step into the hall, and Hermione Granger, who had argued with werewolves and bargained with goblins and stood in front of the Wizengamot at the age of 19 and not flinched, felt the borrowed silk at her shoulder go suddenly, treacherously tight across her chest, as though the room had decided, very quietly, to stop giving her air. He looked up. Across the hall, across 10 years, across the murmuring crowd and the candle-doubled floor, Draco Malfoy looked up and met her eyes and began to walk toward her. He did not hurry. That was the first thing Hermione registered, and the thing that did the most damage. A man who had spent 10 years in exile, even a comfortable, alpine, well-funded exile, might have been forgiven for a certain stiffness of gait, a certain pallor of hesitation, as he walked back into a room full of the people who had once tried him in absentia, and forgiven him only on parchment. But Draco Malfoy crossed the obsidian floor at the unhurried pace of a man arriving at an appointment he had made himself, and the candlelight slid over the dark wool of his robes the way water slides over stone. Hermione did not move. There was a part of her, the disciplined, organizational part that had drafted 3 speeches and a press release before lunch, that was already calculating how to hold her face. Smile, incline the head, extend the right hand. The cameras are on you. The foundation is on you. That part of her was perfectly functional. It was the rest of her that had gone strangely quiet, as though some inner instrument she had not used in a decade had just been struck once, very softly, and was still ringing. She watched him come. She catalogued without meaning to. He was thinner than she remembered, in the way that men become thinner when they have stopped eating to fill a hunger and started eating only to live. His face had lost the boyish sharpness she half recalled from a courtroom and gained something quieter in its place, a kind of weather-worn composure, as though he had been left out in a long winter and had simply learned to stand in it. There was a fine, almost invisible scar at the edge of his jaw that had not been there before. His eyes were exactly the same. He reached the foot of the dais. Madame Pyrites murmured something to him, low, and he gave her a single small nod that was the most deferential gesture Hermione had ever seen a Malfoy make to anyone in livery. Then he climbed the 3 steps, and he was beside her, and the room which had been so loud only a moment ago was now so loud that she could no longer hear it at all. The auctioneer, the consummate professional, was already speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, witches and wizards, it is my privilege to invite to the dais the winning bidder of Lot 41, who has chosen to be named at this hour, and whose generosity tonight will be remembered for a generation, Mr. Draco Malfoy." There was a noise in the hall. It was not quite a gasp. The wealthy do not gasp. It was the sound of 300 people drawing breath at the same time and electing, by silent collective agreement, to do nothing else with it. Draco did not look at the crowd. He was holding a slim leather folio in his left hand, the kind goblins used for the formal transfer of valuables. He turned, half a pace, until he was facing her, and only her. The folio passed from his hand to hers in a movement so quiet it might have been rehearsed. His fingers did not touch hers. He had been very careful that they should not. "Miss Granger," he said. His voice was lower than she remembered. There was almost no inflection in it. a faint trace of something foreign at the edges of certain vowels. 10 years of speaking other languages had done that to him then. He was looking at her the way one looks at a window one has stood outside of for a long time and finally been let in to see clearly. "Mr. Malfoy," she said. The folio was heavy. The leather was warm from his hand. She held it against her ribs as though it were an infant. "It is, of course, a great honour," she heard herself saying. The foundation voice, the press voice, smooth as poured cream. "To receive a gift of this scale on behalf of the children we serve. The Foundation accepts your bid with our deepest gratitude, and I'm not giving the Foundation a bid," he said. He said it gently. He said it without raising his voice. But the auctioneer beside him went very still, in the way professionals go still when an event is, mid-sentence, departing from the script. Hermione's prepared smile did not falter. She had been a trained politician for 10 years. Her face was an instrument she played without thinking. But somewhere behind her sternum, a small, cold finger tapped once. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not giving you the bid," Draco said, and now he was looking at her with a steadiness that was almost unbearable. "I'm giving you the library." For a moment she could not pass the sentence. The words were in English. They were arranged in a recognizable grammatical order. They simply refused to mean what they appeared to mean. All 3,042 volumes, he said. Catalogued, transferred and warded into your name by sunrise tomorrow. They were never going to a private buyer, Granger. I bought them so that they would go to you. The auctioneer made a small, involuntary sound, half an exhalation, half a laugh of pure professional astonishment, and then mastered himself. Hermione stared at him. "Why?" she said. It was not quite a question. It was barely even a word. Her mouth had shaped it before her mind had given it permission. "For the library," Draco said. "The reading library. For the children at Hampstead, and the new house in Cardiff, and the third one you've been trying to fund in Belfast for the past 2 years. For the children's library you've been writing about in every newsletter for 5 years. The one you've been dreaming of." The candle in the stand nearest her popped softly. A bead of wax slid down the silver and gathered at the rim. "How?" she said. The foundation voice was gone. What was left was something smaller and more exposed. "How do you know that?" He smiled. It was not a Malfoy smile. It was not the cold, narrow expression she remembered from 100 corridors at Hogwarts, or the bloodless one he had worn at his own trial. It was something tired and small and almost embarrassed, the smile of a man who has been caught at something he's been doing for a very long time and is, on balance, glad to have been caught. "I've been subscribed to your newsletter," he said, "for 10 years. The hall, which he had stopped hearing, came back for a moment in a single, dizzying rush. The rustle of programs, the faint clink of glasses being set down on trays, the shift of 300 bodies leaning a fraction further forward. 10 years, he said. Quarterly at first, monthly when you went monthly. The donor records are public on request, Granger. Did you ever read them?" Her hand had risen without her permission to the small silver owl at her throat. She forced it down. "We have hundreds of donors, thousands now. I know," he said. "I know you do." which is why I never had to be careful. You were never going to look. I knew that the moment I started." He paused, the faintest tightening at the corner of his mouth. "Did you never wonder about the donor named DM?" Something in her chest performed a slow, awful contraction. DM. She knew the initials. Of course she knew the initials. They had appeared in the gratitude column of every newsletter the Foundation had printed since. Since when? Since the second year. Since the first capital campaign for the Hampstead house. A monthly donor, mid-tier at first, then larger, quietly larger. The accountant had mentioned the name once or twice, our reliable DM, and Hermione had nodded and signed the thank you letter, generated by quill charm, addressed to a discreet box at Gringotts. She had signed those letters for years. She had never, not once, asked who DM was. "You," she said. Her voice was not entirely under her command now. "You are D.M. I stopped being anonymous a long time ago, Granger," he said, quietly, almost apologetically. "You just never read the name of the important one." She was aware, distantly, that the auctioneer had recovered enough to angle himself toward the audience and produce some smooth, improvised remark about the depth of the gift, the historic generosity, the unexpected pleasure of witnessing such a moment. She was aware that a photographer had stepped forward. She was aware that Kingsley, somewhere in the front row, had risen slowly to his feet with his hands folded in front of him, the way Kingsley rose when he meant to applaud, but had not yet decided whether the moment called for noise. She was aware of all of this the way one is aware of weather through a window. What she was actually aware of was the man standing 6 inches to her left. Draco was not looking at the crowd. He had not, she realized, looked at the crowd once since he had entered the hall. He was looking at her, patiently, openly, with the look of someone who has prepared himself for any reaction at all and intends to receive whichever one she offers without flinching. She could not give him a reaction. Her face would not do it. "Why now?" she said. The words came out very low. They were not a question for the public. "Because the library was the right gift," he said. "And because I am tired, Granger, of being the donor whose name you never read." Somewhere behind her, the auctioneer was inviting the audience to recognize, with their applause, the extraordinary generosity of the evening. The hall began obediently to clap. The sound rose around them like a tide that had nothing to do with either of them. Draco inclined his head to her, very slightly, a bow that was not quite a bow. "The transfer documents are inside the folio," he said. "Pyrites will deliver the books to whichever address you specify, by whichever wards you prefer, at whichever hour suits you. You do not need to acknowledge me further tonight. You do not need to acknowledge me at all." He turned with the same unhurried grace to step down from the dais. "Malfoy." It came out before she had decided to say it. Her own voice, and not her Foundation voice. Sharper, plainer, the voice of a girl who had once shouted his name across a stone corridor in fury and had not used that voice since. He stopped on the top step. He did not turn back at once. She saw his shoulders rise very slightly and settle again, the small, controlled breath of a man bracing for impact. Then he turned. The candlelight caught his face from the side. The fine scar at his jaw showed pale against the skin. His eyes, which she had told herself for 10 years she did not remember, were exactly as she had not remembered them. Yes, he said. The hall was waiting. The cameras were waiting. Madame Pyrites, at the foot of the dais, had folded her thin hands in front of her and was waiting too. The folio in Hermione's arms weighed 2 million galleons and 10 years, and something else for which she had, at that moment, no name at all. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She held the folio against her ribs with both hands now, as though it were the only solid thing in the room, and for a long, suspended breath, she simply looked at him, and could not, for the life of her, find a single word in any language she knew that would not be either too much or far too little. In the end, she said nothing. She inclined her head to him, a small, formal motion, the kind one offered an unfamiliar dignitary, and he understood it for what it was. The faintest contraction at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. He stepped down from the dais. Madame Pyrites fell in at his elbow. The double doors at the back of the hall opened for him without anyone touching them, and closed again behind him without sound, and Draco Malfoy was gone from the room as quietly as he had entered it. The applause continued for a long time. Hermione remained on the dais and accepted it. She raised the folio once, in acknowledgement of the gift, because the photographers required it, and because the foundation required it, and she smiled the smile she had been smiling at donors since she was 22 years old. She thanked Kingsley. She thanked the auctioneer. She accepted the embrace of the chair of the foundation board, a stout, silver-haired witch named Augusta Pusey, who pressed her cheek to Hermione's and murmured, my dear, do you know what this means? Do you have any idea what this means?" And Hermione said, yes, of course, she knew exactly what it meant. She did not know what it meant. She moved through the rest of the evening on a kind of practiced autopilot. She spoke to 3 journalists and gave each of them the same prepared sentence about the historic generosity of an anonymous benefactor. Anonymous, she said twice, before catching herself, before correcting it to Mr. Malfoy, whose gift will transform the lives of children for generations. And then she had to repeat the corrected sentence, and the journalists wrote it down, and one of them, a young woman from the Prophet whose face Hermione did not know, looked up at her with bright, hungry eyes and said, "Miss Granger, were you expecting it to be him?" "No," Hermione said. "I was not." It was the truest thing she said all night. By the time she reached her flat in Bloomsbury, it was past 1 in the morning. The cab driver, Muggle, kindly, faintly bewildered by her dress robes, accepted her fare and wished her a good night. She climbed the 4 flights of narrow stairs to her door because the building had no lift, and she had not, in 8 years of living there, found the energy to put one in by magic. The flat smelled, as it always did, of old books and lemon polish, and the faint herbal residue of the calming tea she drank when she could not sleep. She set the folio down on the kitchen table. She made tea. She did not open the folio. She sat on the edge of her old velvet sofa with the cup cradled in both hands, and she watched the gas fire she had not bothered to extinguish that morning gutter low in its grate, and she thought about a column in a quarterly newsletter she had been printing for 10 years. With deepest gratitude to our anonymous donors, including A.F., the Caro Wells family, the estate of E. Doge, M. McGonagall, D.M. D.M. She had typed that initial herself. She had typed it by hand in the column of every newsletter for years before the foundation had grown large enough to hire a secretary. She had typed it without seeing it. She had typed it the way one types one's own postcode, automatic, untroubled, invisible. She set the cup down on the side table. The tea had gone cold without her noticing. She rose, crossed the small sitting room, and opened the bottom drawer of her writing desk. The Foundation's archived donor records lived at the office in Hampstead, locked behind 3 goblin wards and a charm that recognized only her thumb. But she kept her own private set at home, in a leather-bound ledger she updated by hand on Sunday evenings, because she had been raised by a dentist and a dental nurse, and she did not entirely trust anyone else's bookkeeping, including the Foundation's. She carried the ledger to the sofa. She lit the lamp. She opened it. She had intended to begin with the most recent year. Some part of her, some last, retreating part, had hoped that the donations would turn out to be small, that DM would resolve into a trickle of polite, modest contributions, the kind of penance a wealthy man might make to soothe a wealthy conscience. She turned to the entries for the current calendar year, and she ran her finger down the column. DM, March, 15,000 galleons. DM, June, 20,000 galleons. Earmarked, Cardiff House Roof. DM, September, 40,000 galleons. Earmarked, Belfast Acquisition Deposit. Her finger stopped on the September entry, the Belfast Acquisition Deposit. She had taken that deposit to the seller in person, in a coffee shop on the Falls Road, with a goblin's sealed draft in her bag, and she had walked back to her hotel with a signed letter of intent and tears in her eyes that she had refused to permit herself to shed in public. The deposit had appeared in the Foundation's account exactly 4 hours after she had sent out the funding appeal. She had assumed at the time that it was a board member acting quickly. She had thanked Augusta Pusey at the next board meeting. Augusta had looked faintly puzzled and accepted the thanks anyway. It had not been Augusta. She turned back a page, and another, and another. DM, every month, for 9 years and 11 months. Some months it was small, 300 galleons, 500. The first year mostly. The donations of a man establishing a habit cautiously, in the way one feeds a wild animal one wishes not to startle. By the 3rd year, the monthly figure had stabilized at 5,000. By the 5th, 10. Every capital campaign she had ever run was matched in the following week by a donation from DM equal to whatever shortfall she had named in the appeal letter, equal to the galleon. She had been writing those appeal letters for years, naming the shortfall in the closing paragraph because her old fundraising tutor had told her to. And somewhere in Switzerland, a man had been opening each one of them and writing a draft for the exact amount. She turned the pages slowly. The lamp guttered. She did not relight it. By the time she reached the very first entry, DM, July, 11 years ago, 50 galleons, no earmark. Her hands were trembling so finely that she had to set the ledger down on her knees to keep the page steady. 50 galleons. The first month the Foundation had existed. The first month she had ever sent out a fundraising letter. He had been 21 years old and freshly exiled to a country he did not know, and he had read her first appeal, and he had sent her 50 galleons. She closed the ledger. She sat for a long time in the dark. Outside, very faintly, she could hear the rain that had been threatening all evening finally arriving. A thin, steady patter against the sash window, the kind of London rain that did not so much fall as accumulate. The gas fire hissed once and went out. She thought. He watched. She thought, for 10 years, in a country I have never seen, a man I had not thought of in any deliberate way, sat down at a desk once a month and read what I was doing and gave me what I needed and signed only his initials and waited. She thought, he waited for what? The answer was so close to the surface that she would not let herself touch it. She rose abruptly, crossed to the kitchen, and set about the tea again, because the tea was something her hands knew how to do. The kettle whistled. She poured. She brought the cup back to the sofa. She sat down. She picked up the folio at last. It opened on a single sheet of heavy, cream-coloured parchment, the kind only the oldest stationer in Diagon Alley still made, watermarked faintly with an old crest she did not recognise. The handwriting was small, very even, slightly slanted to the left. Miss Granger, the transfer of Lot 41 has been completed at Gringotts under your name and the Foundation's seal. Madam Pyrites will be at your Hampstead office at any hour of any day you specify, with the relevant volumes and a team of properly bonded carriers. If you should prefer the library to be delivered to a different address, or to be held in trust at the Manor until such time as the Foundation's premises are ready to receive it, I am, of course, at your disposal. I am aware that the manner of tonight's gift may have been less than welcome, and that the manner of its giver almost certainly was. I would not, in the ordinary course of things, have intruded upon your evening. I had intended, when the lot came up for sale, to acquire it through Pyrites and have it delivered to you with a note. The Ministry's protocol on lots above 1 million galleons did not permit this. The buyer was required to present in person. I am sorry to have made you stand on a stage with me. 3,000 books are a great many books to receive without consultation, and I do not wish to be the man who imposes a library upon a woman who has not asked for one. If you would prefer to dispose of any volume, all volumes, or the gift in its entirety, you may do so without explanation. I have made no claim upon what is now yours. I will be at the Manor for the next several weeks, attending to matters that have waited. Should you wish to discuss the transfer, the cataloguing, or anything else, I am at your service. Should you wish never to discuss any of it, I will understand. Yours with respect, D. Malfoy. Below the signature, in the same neat hand, smaller, almost an afterthought. I have not minded the silence, Granger. I only wanted you to have the books. She read the letter once. She read it again. She set it down on her knees very carefully, and she pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes, and she discovered with a kind of distant anthropological surprise that she was crying. Not the sharp, useful crying of grief or exhaustion, which she knew well, but the slow, undefended crying of a person who has just understood, very late in the day, that she has been loved without knowing it for a very long time. She did not let herself name it that. Not yet. She was Hermione Granger, and she had been disciplined about names for 10 years. But she sat on the velvet sofa in the dark with the rain on the window and the cold tea on the side table and the folio open on her knees, and she thought, with a clarity that was almost painful, I have to go to him. The thought arrived whole. It did not ask her permission. She rose. She walked to the writing desk. She drew out a clean sheet of parchment and uncapped her ink. She sat. She dipped the quill. She held it above the page. The quill hovered there for a long time while the rain went on, and she stared at the blank parchment as though it were a door she had not yet decided whether to open. And then, without writing a single word, she set the quill down again. She did not write him for 3 days. It was not avoidance. Hermione Granger had spent 10 years cultivating the precise distinction between avoidance and deliberation, and she knew which one this was. Avoidance was what she had done at 22, when Ron had moved out, and she had filled 6 months with committee meetings rather than sit in the silent flat. Deliberation was what she did now, at 30, when something arrived that had weight, and she set it down on the table of her mind and walked around it slowly until she understood every side of it. The library arrived at Hampstead on the morning of the second day. Madame Pyrites came in person, with 4 bonded carriers and a small, sleek goblin clerk, who introduced himself as Mr. Scarn, and produced a transfer ledger as long as Hermione's forearm. The volumes had been packed in crates of cedar wood, lined with silk, each crate sealed with a wax impression Hermione did not recognize. A pair of crossed wands over an open book, no family crest, no monogram. His own seal, she realized, not the Malfoy crest, something he had made. She stood in the front hall of the Hampstead house and watched the crates carried in, and she signed where Mr. Scarn instructed her to sign, and the children, those who had no school that morning, gathered on the upper landing and peered down through the banisters, whispering, because they had been told something extraordinary was happening, but not what. Lottie, who was 8 and had been at the foundation for 3 years and was small for her age and fierce for her size, leaned so far over the rail that Hermione had to call up sharply, "Charlotte Beasley, if you go over that banister, I shall personally—" "What are they, miss?" Lottie called down. "What's in the boxes?" Hermione looked up at her, at the 24 small faces ranged along the landing, brown and pale and freckled and scarred, watching her with the bright, unself-conscious greed of children who have learned that good things sometimes do happen. "Books," she said. "They are books, my loves. They are your library." The landing erupted. She did not write him that night either. She wrote, instead, 3 drafts of a letter and burned all 3 in the gas fire. The first was too cold, and the second was too warm, and the third was so carefully balanced between the 2 that it sounded, when she read it aloud, like a ministry communiqué. She poured a glass of wine she did not drink and sat on the sofa and thought about a boy at a desk in Switzerland writing 50 galleons into a draft and signing only his initials. On the 3rd morning, she went to the office very early and locked the door of her own little room behind her and pulled down the donor file from the top shelf, the official one, the one the foundation kept. She was looking, although she did not entirely admit it to herself, for the address on file for D. Malfoy. There was no address. There was a Gringotts vault number and a notation in Augusta Pusey's hand, 8 years old. Donor prefers all correspondence routed through Gringotts' holding box. No direct address. Verified. There was a single line of contact instructions in goblin shorthand. There was nothing else. He had given her 50 galleons a month for a decade, and he had not once allowed his actual address to be written in a file she could open. It took her 20 minutes to compose the letter. Mr. Malfoy, the library has been received and is at present in temporary storage at the Hampstead House, pending the completion of the new reading room premises. I am writing to thank you formally on behalf of the Foundation and to request, if it would not unduly trouble you, the opportunity to discuss the cataloguing in person. There are particulars regarding the rarer volumes which I should prefer not to commit to paper. I am, of course, at your disposal as to time and place. With sincere thanks, Hermione Granger. She read it twice. It was perfectly correct. It was, she noted with a small private bitterness, almost exactly the letter she would have written to a stranger. She sealed it and gave it to Pickett, the Foundation's elderly grey owl, with instructions to deliver to D. Malfoy at his Gringotts holding box, and not to wait for a reply. Pickett returned at moonrise with a reply. Miss Granger, the Manor, tomorrow at 3, if it suits you. The drive from the Flue Gate is approximately a quarter of a mile. I shall walk down to meet you. The wards have been adjusted for your arrival. D. Malfoy. That was all. She read the lines 4 times before she folded the parchment and put it inside the leather ledger, and then she went and stood at the window of her flat and watched the rain begin again, finer this time, almost a mist, and she thought, the wards have been adjusted for your arrival, and felt something she did not name. She arrived at 5 minutes to 3 because she would not give him the satisfaction of waiting and would not give him the satisfaction of being late. The Flue deposited her, with a soft displacement of cold autumn air, at a small stone gatehouse she had never seen before. The gate beyond was wrought iron, very black, very old, the bars woven into a pattern of trailing vines, so finely worked that she had to look twice to see that the leaves were moving very slowly in a wind that was not there. He was already at the gate. He was wearing dark grey wool, a heavy travelling coat of the kind one wore in mountains, no hat. The weather was English, low cloud, the smell of wet leaves and rotting apples in a hedge somewhere out of sight. She had pictured the manor in 3 or 4 versions on her way here, and none of them included the man standing at the gate as though he had walked down the drive simply because he had said he would. Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy. He raised his wand once, briefly, and the gate opened inward without a sound. He did not extend his hand. She did not extend hers. They walked. The drive was long. Beech trees lined it, very old, their leaves the colour of wet copper. Underfoot, the gravel was clean but not raked, lived on, she thought, but not displayed. After perhaps 100 yards, she said, because the silence had grown too dense to breathe in. You walked down. It's a clear afternoon, he said. The manor is half shut. I do not keep enough staff to send anyone out, and I would not have wanted to send anyone out in any case. A pause. I thought it would be unkind to make you walk up alone. She did not look at him. The trees were very tall. Half shut. The east wing is closed, he said. Most of the south. I live in 5 rooms, Granger. I find it sufficient. She did glance at him then. He was looking ahead at the drive. There was no self-pity in his face. There was no martyrdom. He had stated it the way one states the temperature. It is a great deal of house for one man, she said. It is, he said. It was a great deal of house for 3. It was a great deal of house for 30, if I'm being honest. The manor was built to be looked at, not to be lived in. My mother understood that. My father did not. She did not know what to say to that. They walked on. The manor came into view at the curve of the drive. It was lower than she had expected, longer, the limestone weathered to a colour somewhere between honey and bone. Ivy had been allowed, in a careful, deliberate way, to reclaim the south wall. A single chimney, very high up, was smoking. The rest of the chimneys were cold. He took her in through a small side door, not the main entrance. A house elf, ancient, dressed in a clean grey pillowcase pinned with a bronze brooch, met them in the passage and bowed gravely to Hermione and informed her, in a voice like dry leaves, that tea would be brought to the long library in 20 minutes, and would the lady prefer Indian or Chinese? Indian, please. Thank you. The house elf bowed again and was gone. Draco led her down a corridor she barely registered. Dark wainscoting, a series of landscapes in heavy gilt frames, the smell of beeswax and something colder underneath, stone and old smoke. And then he opened a tall door and stepped back and let her go in first. She stopped on the threshold. The long library at Malfoy Manor was not a room. It was a chamber, 3 stories high, walled in dark wood from floor to gallery, the upper galleries reached by spiral iron stairs at each corner. The shelves rose to a vaulted ceiling that had been painted very long ago with a night sky. Not the standard enchantment, but a fresco, old paint on old plaster. The constellations slightly wrong, because they had been painted from a sky no living person had seen. Tall, mullioned windows ran the length of the south wall. The afternoon light came through them in long, soft bars, and the dust in the bars moved in slow, considered drifts, as dust moves only in rooms that have been very still for a very long time. The shelves were empty, not all of them. There were perhaps 100 volumes still on the lower shelves, scattered, the way books are scattered in a room being packed up. A reading desk in the centre of the room held 3 open ledgers, an inkwell, and a single quill. But the great mass of the shelves, the upper galleries, the long south wall, the alcoves on either side of the marble fireplace, was bare. She turned to him slowly. This was the library. Yes. This was the library you sold me. Yes. You did not split it. You did not keep the... I kept 12 volumes, he said. Books my mother gave me. The rest, Granger, was a collection assembled by men whose names I am not eager to preserve. A pause. He was looking at the empty shelves, not at her. It was not difficult to part with. It was, in fact, the easiest thing I have done in a decade. She walked into the room. She walked into it slowly. Her shoes, sensible, low-heeled, the boots she wore for sight visits, were loud on the parquet, and she was conscious of the sound. She walked to the centre of the room, to the reading desk, and she stopped there and looked up at the painted sky and at the empty galleries and at the long bars of dusty light. He had not followed her in. He stood in the doorway. He was waiting, she understood, for her to permit him to come further. Mr. Malfoy. Granger. She did not turn to look at him. I am going to ask you something, she said. Her voice was steady. The library swallowed it gently. And I would like you to answer me truthfully, even if the truthful answer is one that you would prefer not to give. A pause. Of course. She turned then. He was framed in the doorway against the dim corridor behind him, the grey wool of his coat dark against the limestone, his hands folded loosely in front of him. his face composed and entirely still. "Why?" she said. "Did it have to be a library?" He did not answer at once. He looked at her across the long, dust-lit room, across 10 years and 3,000 books, and a column of initials in a quarterly newsletter, and he opened his mouth to speak and closed it again. The silence in the long library stretched. The dust in the light shifted. Somewhere behind the walls, an old clock marked a quarter hour with a single, muffled chime. "Because you love them," he said at last. He did not say it the way men in drawing rooms said sentimental things. He said it the way one states a fact that has been verified repeatedly over a long period under controlled conditions. "Books," he said, in case she had misunderstood. "You love books, Granger. You always have. When they stopped being permitted to you in the war, you carried one in a beaded bag for a year. When you worked in the ministry, you kept your office on the floor with the largest archive because you preferred the smell of it. When you left the ministry to run the foundation, the first newsletter you ever wrote, the one you sent to 50 people in July 11 years ago, had a postscript at the bottom. I still have it." He paused. "You wrote, 'If any of you have books to spare, for the children, they are needed more than money.' You wrote it at the bottom of a fundraising letter. You did not lead with it. You led with food and clothing and warm rooms, because those were the things you were supposed to lead with. The postscript was where you said the thing you meant." He looked at her. His hands, still folded in front of him, had not moved. "I thought," he said, "that for once in my life I might be permitted to give the things someone meant." Hermione stood at the reading desk in the center of the dust-lit chamber and did not trust her face to do what she asked of it. She looked down at the open ledger on the desk because it was something to look at that was not him. The ledger was a catalogue, half complete, his handwriting in the left-hand column, and an older hand, perhaps his mother's, in the right. "You remembered," she said, "the postscript of a fundraising letter from 11 years ago." "I have it in a drawer upstairs," he said. "I can fetch it if you want proof." "I don't want proof." "No," he said. "I thought not." She raised her head. "Why did you never write?" she said. "In 10 years, Malfoy. Not a line, not a note, not once." He did not look away. "What would I have written?" "Anything." "Granger," he said. And there was, for the first time, something almost rough in his voice, something that had been kept behind a door for a long time and was now standing just on the other side of it. "What precisely do you imagine I could have written to you in the first year after the war that you would have done anything with other than throw into the fire?" Be honest." She closed her mouth. "Exactly," he said, quietly, without triumph. "I did the arithmetic, Granger. I did it once, in the 2nd month, and I did not do it again because the answer did not change. A letter from me to you in the year after the trials was a thing that would have hurt you to receive. A letter in the 2nd year was a thing that would have hurt you less, but still not helped you. A letter in the 5th year was a thing you would have read and set aside, because by then you would have built a life I had no place in, and my intrusion would have been simply discourteous. I have made a great many errors in my life. I was determined that contacting you should not be one of them. So you chose to watch." "I chose to pay attention," he said. "There is a difference." "Is there?" You may tell me if there isn't." She was aware that her hand had curled very tightly around the edge of the reading desk. She made it release. The old wood had left a faint impression in her palm. "Malfoy," she said, "you paid for the Belfast deposit." "Yes." "You paid for the Cardiff roof." "Yes." "You paid for the appeal we ran in March 3 years ago when Lottie arrived with pneumonia and we had nowhere to quarantine her, and I sat in this office at 2 in the morning writing a letter asking for 7,000 galleons, and you sent 7,000 galleons in the Morning Post without a note." "Yes." "You knew who Lottie was." "I knew," he said, "that the appeal referenced a child admitted that night with respiratory distress. I did not know her name. I do not know her name now. Her name is Charlotte." A small pause. "Charlotte, then?" She stared at him. "Do you understand?" she said, and her voice was not steady any longer. "What it is to discover that for 10 years of one's life a man has been standing behind one at a very great distance, holding up the... She stopped. She forced herself to draw breath. "I don't have the word. I don't have the word for what you have done." "There isn't one," he said. "No, there isn't." He took, for the first time, a step into the library. Only one step. He stopped again and waited, the way one waits at the edge of a field containing a horse one does not wish to startle. "Granger," he said, "I am going to say this once, because you have asked me to be truthful and because you will not ask me a second time. I did not expect gratitude. I did not want gratitude. I arranged the donations through Gringotts specifically so that you would not be able to offer any. I gave the initials and no more, because I knew, Granger, that if you had the full name, you would have sent the money back in the first year, and rightly, and I would have lost the one small useful thing I had found to do with my life. You don't know that I would have sent it back." "Yes," he said, "I do." She did not argue. He was right. She would have. "Tea, madam." The house elf had appeared in the doorway with a tray. The tray bore a teapot, 2 cups of translucent bone china, a small jug of milk, a plate of plain shortbread. The house elf had the great tact of very old servants. Her eyes did not once flick toward her master, or toward the woman standing in the centre of the long library with her hand at her throat. "Thank you," Hermione said, and her voice came out almost normal, which was a small astonishment. "Would you set it on the desk, please?" "Very good, madam." The tray was set down. The house elf bowed and withdrew. The door closed. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Draco said very quietly, "Shall I pour?" "Yes, please." He crossed the library to the desk. He did not pass close to her. He kept, she noticed, the width of the desk between them at all times, with the care of a man who had worked out the geometry of the room beforehand. He lifted the teapot. His hands were steady. She watched them and remembered distantly that she had once, as a girl, seen him hold a wand at her and seen those same hands shake with temper. And she had the strange thought that she did not know this man. She had never known him. The boy she had known was dead, and a different man had come out the other side of that death, and she had been receiving letters from him for 10 years without reading the signature. He poured. He slid a cup across the desk toward her, stopping it with one finger at the midpoint so that it was easy for her to reach without her hand going near his. "Milk?" "A little." He added milk. He slid the jug back. She lifted the cup. Her hand shook once, very slightly, and she steadied it with the other hand and drank. And the tea was very good and hot, and she was grateful for it in a way that was almost embarrassing. Malfoy. Yes. I am very angry with you. Yes. I do not fully understand why I am angry. No. I think it is because I am not someone who has been given things without knowing. I am not someone who has been helped without consent. I have been the one who helps. For 10 years, I have been the one who sees the appeal and writes the check and signs the letter and... She stopped. She set the cup down. The china made a small, clean sound against the wood. I have been the one who gives, she said, and you have been, without my knowledge or my permission, giving to me for 10 years. And I don't know what to do with that, Malfoy. I do not know what to do with it, because I cannot give you back what you have given me. The arithmetic does not work. I cannot... Granger. What? I did not give to you. She looked up at him. I gave to the children, he said. Read the earmarks. She opened her mouth to answer him and found that she had nothing to say. He set his own cup down very carefully on the desk between them. The afternoon had shifted. The long bars of dusty light had moved along the parquet by a full foot. Outside, somewhere beyond the mullioned windows, a rook called once. I will ask Pyrites, he said, to begin the cataloguing at the Hampstead house in the morning so that you may supervise the shelving personally. I will not be present. I will provide any particulars regarding provenance that you require by owl. If you prefer to conduct our remaining business by correspondence, I will understand. If you prefer to come here once or twice more to consult the older ledgers, I will understand that as well. The choice, Granger, is yours. And after? After what? After the cataloguing, after the transfer, after the children have their library. He did not answer at once. He looked at her across the small, honest distance of the reading desk, the teapot steaming between them, the empty shelves climbing 3 stories behind him, the painted sky above with its slightly wrong constellations. And she saw for the first time since he had walked into the auction hall 3 days ago, something crack in his composure, only slightly, only at the corners, but she saw it. After, he said, I had not allowed myself to plan for. The rook called again, closer. A log in the fireplace, lit, she now noticed, with a low, careful flame, some time before she had arrived, for her comfort, shifted in its grate and sent up a small fountain of sparks. The sparks climbed briefly against the dark stone of the chimney breast and went out one by one as they rose. She looked at him. She said, Then plan for it. He raised his head. She held his eyes across the desk. She did not look away. Her hand was flat on the wood beside her cup, and it was not any longer shaking. And then he closed it again, because a man who has spent 10 years choosing his words has forgotten how to speak without choosing them. He lowered his eyes to the desk. Granger, he said, you do not know what you are asking. I know precisely what I am asking. You have had 3 days. I have had 10 years. I simply did not know it. He raised his head at that. His face had settled into something very still. He was holding the edge of the reading desk with one hand, and his knuckles, she saw, had gone the colour of old ivory. You are, he said, the most deliberate person I have ever met. You do not speak first and think second. You never have. I am not going to sit in this library and accept a sentence from you that you have not had the time to consider. I will not do it, Granger. You may call it cowardice. You may call it whatever pleases you. I'm not calling it anything. Then hear me. She closed her mouth. You are angry, he said. You said so yourself. You are also extraordinarily kind. You have always been extraordinarily kind. It is the quality of yours I have admired longest and understood least. And you have just discovered that a man you did not think about has been thinking about you. Those three things in one room, at 1 hour, on an afternoon when you have not slept properly in 3 days, are not conditions under which you may make a promise to me. I will not accept a promise made under those conditions. I will not hold you to one. I am not making a promise. You said plan for after. Yes, I said plan for it. I did not say what the plan should be. He stopped. She watched him work through it. She watched the small, precise motion of a mind that had been trained over a decade of solitude to examine every sentence 3 times before responding to it. She had forgotten, or had perhaps never known, that he was intelligent in this particular way. Not her kind of intelligence, not the accumulative, voracious kind, but a careful, patient, almost architectural kind, the intelligence of a man who built his sentences the way other men built walls. No, he said slowly, you did not. I said it because I do not want to leave this room with an arrangement that ends at the cataloguing of 3,000 books, Malfoy. I do not have an opinion yet on what it should be instead. I have only the opinion that it should not be nothing. Not nothing, he repeated. Not nothing. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, almost to himself, that is a modest request. It is the only one I am willing to make today. Yes, he said, I see that. He released the edge of the desk. He flexed his hand once, then folded it with the other at the small of his back, a gesture she did not remember from the boy, and found now oddly formal and oddly comforting, the way the postures of old soldiers were comforting. He walked, without hurry, to the nearest of the empty shelves, and he put one hand flat against the wood. He did not speak at once. She let him not speak. The house elf's name is Tippy, he said eventually. She blinked. She was my mother's, he said. She came with my mother when my mother married into this family. She went with my mother to France at the end of the war, when my mother found that she could not live in England any longer. My mother died 6 years ago. Tippy came back. She was offered her freedom, and she refused it. She said the manor was not fit to be left to me alone, and she was, I suspect, correct. She is the only member of the household staff I retain. The rest of the house is closed because I cannot bring myself to pay wages to strangers to maintain rooms I do not use and do not wish to see. He took his hand from the shelf. I tell you this, he said, turning to face her, because you asked me 3 minutes ago to plan for after, and I am telling you that the after you are proposing, whatever shape it takes, whatever modesty of shape, involves walking in and out of a house where I live alone with one elderly house elf in 5 rooms of a building designed for 30. It involves, Granger, being seen doing so. It involves the Prophet and Kingsley's discretion and the Foundation's board and the children at Hampstead, and 1,000 small practical frictions which I will not ask you to accept without making them plain. I know what the frictions are. You think you do. I was the minister's deputy for 4 years, Malfoy. I have had my private life in every newspaper in Britain for a decade. I know exactly what the frictions are. He looked at her. Yes, he said. I suppose you do. I am not proposing, she said carefully, anything that requires me to be seen. I am proposing that we do not end at the cataloguing. I am proposing correspondence, consultation, the ordinary commerce of two adults who have a shared project. The library, the children's reading room, the children's reading room. And after the reading room is built, he said, and the books are shelved and the project is complete, then we will see, she said, what other projects there are. He laughed. It was a very small laugh, almost inaudible, and it surprised him as much as it surprised her. It died quickly, but it had been there, and she had heard it, and something in her chest loosened by a fraction of a degree that she did not permit herself to examine. Granger, he said, Malfoy, you are managing me. A little. You are managing me the way you managed the American collector at the auction. No, she said. I am managing you considerably more gently than I managed the American collector at the auction. You have not noticed because you have not been managed in some time. He almost laughed again. He did not, quite. Very well, he said. Correspondence, consultation, the ordinary commerce of two adults. I accept your terms. They are not terms. They are terms, Granger. You have simply phrased them with more grace than most people do. She inclined her head. She could not entirely prevent the small, dry smile that accompanied the gesture. She saw him see it. She saw him, very carefully, not react to it. They drank their tea. The tea had cooled, but was still good. Neither of them sat down. There were 2 leather armchairs drawn up to the marble fireplace, but by unspoken agreement they remained standing at the reading desk, as though sitting would have been a concession too large for an afternoon that had already asked more of both of them than either had prepared for. The rook outside the mullioned windows had been joined by a second rook. The light on the parquet had moved another foot. He asked her, in a voice that had returned to the careful, neutral register of their first minutes, about the Hampstead house, whether the shelving would be built to bespoke specifications or taken from stock, whether she had a carpenter, whether she had considered charming the lower shelves against damp, because the house, he recalled, backed onto a heath, and heaths were notorious. She answered him. Her voice, too, returned to its register. They spoke for perhaps 20 minutes about shelving and damp charms, and whether children's fingers required a particular grade of varnish. And underneath every sentence ran another conversation which neither of them acknowledged and both of them heard. This is what it will be, the second conversation said. This is what we are agreeing to. Shelving and damp charms, and the provenance of a Salazar-era bestiary. We will speak of these things. We will speak of them in letters and across desks. We will speak of them for as long as it takes. And we will not speak of the other thing until one of us is ready. And we will know when that is, and we will not hurry it. When her tea was finished, she set the cup down and said, I should go back. Of course. The shelving fitter is coming at 5. Then you should certainly go back. He did not move from where he stood. She gathered her satchel from the chair where she had set it. She drew her cloak around her shoulders. She had come in a muggle cloak of good, heavy wool, because it was the warmest thing she owned, not because she had been thinking of impressions. And she turned toward the door. At the door, she stopped. She did not know precisely why. Her hand was on the handle. The corridor beyond was dark and beeswax-scented and perfectly traversable. But something held her there, some small, stubborn, unfinished thing. She turned back. He was still at the desk. He had not moved. He was watching her with the faintly braced expression of a man who had known she would turn and had been waiting to see what she would do. "Malfoy." "Yes." "Thank you for the tea." He inclined his head. "Thank you," she said, "for walking down to meet me." A pause. "It was not a kindness," he said. "It was, I wanted to." She nodded. She did not trust her voice for another sentence. She opened the door. "Granger." She stopped with her hand on the frame. "May I write to you?" he said, "when the first volumes are ready for inspection, not through Gringotts, directly." She did not turn. She was looking down the dark corridor at a patch of afternoon light falling on the parquet halfway along. "Yes," she said. "Please write directly." "Where?" "The Hampstead office. You have the address. It is in every newsletter." "I meant," he said, and his voice was very quiet now, "to which part of your life?" She did then turn her head. He had come out from behind the desk. He had not come close. He was standing perhaps 10 feet from her, his hands folded again at the small of his back, his face composed, his eyes were not composed at all. She looked at him across the long library, at the empty shelves, the painted sky, the low fire in the grate, the teacups cooling on the desk. "The part that reads the letters," she said. "Right there." He breathed out once, very slowly. "Very well," he said. And she stepped through the door into the dark corridor, and she walked back down the length of the house beside the silent house elf who had appeared from nowhere to guide her out. And she did not, until she was through the gate and the flu had taken her, allow herself to notice. "Plan for after, Malfoy," she said. "I am asking you to." And she watched his mouth open, watched the careful 10-year composure of his face break, not into a smile, not into anything so generous, but into something younger and more bewildered, the expression of a man who is prepared for every possible response except the one now being offered to him, that her hands were shaking, or that she had, somewhere between the reading desk and the wrought iron gate, stopped being angry. She did not notice it in the flu. She did not notice it on the Hampstead doorstep, where the shelving fitter, a soft-spoken wizard from Cork called Mr. Donnelly, was waiting with a pencil behind his ear and a coil of tape measure in his hand. She noticed it only that night, very late, when she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of cocoa going cold in front of her, and realized that for the first time in 3 days she had come home and not burned a letter in the gas fire. The letters began the next morning. The first arrived with Pickett before she had finished her porridge. It was a single sheet, the same cream parchment, the same slanted hand. Granger, Pyrites, reports that the first 2 crates are unpacked, volumes in acceptable condition. 2 of the Agrippas have foxing at the edges. I would recommend a restorative charm before shelving, as the foxing is the type that spreads. The charm is Scourgify adjacent, but not identical. Reference: Boethius, care of the vellum text, page 341. I have a copy here if you need it. D. She read it twice. She laughed, once, very short, at the austerity of the signature. D. Not even the full initial, not even the full D. Malfoy of the folio letter, as though he had decided in the first correspondence to establish the smallest possible footprint. She wrote back within the hour. Malfoy, Mr. Donnelly, my carpenter, will weep when he hears the word foxing, because he has been weeping about damp charms for 3 days. I do have Boethius, though I suspect my copy is older than your copy, and therefore, in your view, more correct. Please do send your Agrippa's treatment notes if you have kept any. I assume you have kept all of them. H. He did. They arrived by evening post, 4 close-written pages of treatment notes in the same neat hand, annotated in the margins by a second hand that was smaller and brisker, and, she realized after a moment, must have been his mother's. She read the notes at her kitchen table with a glass of wine and did not burn anything. That was how it began. The letters did not, at first, discuss anything but the library. They discussed foxing. They discussed the proper latitude of a shelved manuscript, the humidity tolerances of vellum, whether the Hampstead house required a dehumidifying charm renewed monthly, or a permanent rune circle cut into the floor beneath the shelves. Mr. Donnelly, who had never been consulted on rune circles in his life, was made to understand that his commission had expanded. He accepted the expansion with the equanimity of a cork carpenter who had long ago decided that English witches were not to be argued with. Once a week, a letter would contain at the end a single additional line, never a sentence, a line. The snow has come to the hills, earlier than last year. The rook on the south wall has acquired a mate. I did not know rooks paired this late. Tippy has made quince jelly. She asks me to ask you whether the children eat jelly. Hermione answered the lines. We had a day of rain in London. The children are restless. I believe I shall take them walking regardless. Rooks pair for life, I think. Check Scamander. My copy is at the office. The children eat jelly with the ferocity of locusts. Please thank Tippy. Ask her whether she would consider contributing the recipe to the Foundation cookbook. We are assembling one to sell at the Christmas Gala. Tippy contributed the recipe. It was written in a hand Hermione did not know, very round and careful, on a small square of paper tucked inside Draco's next letter. Hermione put the square of paper in the front pocket of her ledger and did not take it out again, because she had, she realized, begun to keep things. The reading room took 7 weeks to complete. She did not go back to the manor in those 7 weeks. She thought about it. She did not do it. The weekly exchange of letters had established, by unspoken agreement, a rhythm which neither of them wished to disturb too soon. And there was, also, a quiet small pleasure in writing to him, in sealing the letter with the Foundation's owl wax, in watching Pickett disappear into a December sky over Bloomsbury. A pleasure she was not yet ready to replace with the sharper, riskier pleasure of his actual presence. She was, she understood now, proceeding with the deliberation she had defended in his library. She was walking around the thing. Twice in those weeks he sent a book, not from the library, from his own 5 rooms, a small thing of essays by a French herbalist, because she had mentioned in passing that she was trying to grow rosemary in her kitchen window, and failing. A very old, soft-bound edition of Child's English and Scottish Ballads, Volume 3 only, because she had quoted a line from the Ballad of Tam Lin in a letter about fairy tale provenance, and he had written back, "You should have the whole ballad, not a quotation," and the book had arrived 2 days later with a slip of paper marking the page. He did not inscribe either of them. He simply sent them. She shelved them on the small bookcase by her bed and did not mention in her reply that she had done so. The reading room was finished on a Tuesday in the second week of December. She stood in the doorway on Tuesday evening after Mr. Donnelly and his apprentices had gone, and she looked at what they had made. Oak shelves from floor to coving, rubbed with the particular wax that smelled faintly of honey. Low window seats under the 2 sash windows, upholstered in a deep red wool that the children would ruin within a month, which was as it should be. A hearth at the far end, already laid. A long, low table down the middle of the room with 8 child-sized chairs. The shelves were empty still. The books would be moved across the following morning. But the room was, in every other respect, ready. She took one of the child-sized chairs and sat in it. She sat for a long time. She thought about a boy in Switzerland opening an envelope containing a fundraising letter, of which the postscript had said, "If any of you have books to spare, for the children they are needed more than money." She thought about the 50 galleons. She thought about the 11 years between that postscript and this empty, honey-waxed, red-seated room. Then she got up and went to her desk and wrote the shortest letter she had yet sent him. "Malfoy, the reading room is finished. The shelving goes in tomorrow. The opening is on Friday at 3. The children have been practicing a song which I cannot prevent. Will you come? H." He did not answer until the next afternoon. "Granger, I will not come to the opening. The prophet will be there. A photograph of me beside you on Friday would cost you a decade of carefully managed reputation in a single printing, and it would cost the foundation a great deal more than a photograph. I will not do it to you, and I will not do it to the children. Open the reading room. Let the children sing their song. I will be at the manor, and I will, if you will permit me, think of you at 3 o'clock. Come and see me afterwards if you can. The gate will be open. D." She read the letter once in her office, and then she sat at her desk for some time with her hands folded in front of her. He was right, of course. He was entirely right. She had not herself fully calculated the cost of the photograph, and now that he had calculated it for her, she could see that it was, to the penny, what he had said it was. The correctness of his reasoning, however, was not what kept her at her desk for the next 20 minutes. What kept her there was the last paragraph. "Come and see me afterwards if you can. The gate will be open." She did not answer the letter. She did not need to. The opening of the reading room was a success. She would remember it in fragments afterwards, as one remembered any occasion on which one had been both the host and the person the occasion was secretly about. The children sang. A photographer from the Prophet took a picture of Lottie cutting the ribbon, and Lottie, with the grave, bright dignity of the small, cut it on the second attempt and was applauded by a room of 40 people. Augusta Pusey wept into a handkerchief. Kingsley, who had found time to come, gave a short, warm speech that did not mention the donor by name. Tippy's quince jelly, sent in 3 small pots by the morning post, was spread on scones and eaten by children who announced loudly that it was the best jelly they had ever had in their lives. At 5 o'clock, the last of the guests left. At 5:30, the children were herded up to the old common room for supper. At 5:45, Hermione stood alone in the new reading room in the red afternoon light and looked at 3,000 shelved books in honey-waxed oak. She thought, I should go. She thought, I have earned the right to go. She took her cloak from the peg in the hall. She told Maeve, the duty mother that night, that she would not be back until late. She walked out onto the heath in the blue December dusk. She apparated. The gate of Malfoy Manor was open. She walked up the drive in the last of the light. The beeches were bare now, their branches very black against a sky the colour of bruised violet. A dusting of frost had come in the afternoon and was beginning to settle on the gravel. Her breath made small white plumes in front of her. The single chimney, very high up, was smoking. The rest of the chimneys were still cold. He was waiting for her at the side door. He had not worn his travelling coat this time. He was in dark, heavy wool, a scarf at his throat against the cold, no gloves. His hair, in the blue light, was almost silver. He opened the door as she reached the step. He did not offer her his arm. He did not extend a hand. He simply stepped back to let her in, the way he had stepped back to let her into the library 7 weeks ago, and she crossed the threshold into the warm beeswax-scented passage and stopped and turned and looked up at him. You came, he said. I said I would. You said nothing of the kind. I said nothing, she said, because saying nothing was the only way I could answer you without sounding as though I were... She stopped. She did not know how she would have finished the sentence. She was aware, very suddenly, of how close they were standing in the narrow passage, of the cold still clinging to the wool of her cloak, of the warmth of the house coming around her and beginning to thaw the small frozen place between her shoulder blades. He was looking at her. He did not move. He did not speak. His hand rose, once slightly, as though of its own accord, and stopped in mid-air a foot from her shoulder, and, very deliberately, lowered itself again. But she had seen the hand rise, and something in her, some careful 10-year thing, said, quietly, without fanfare, with the tone of a door clicking shut behind her, no, not this time. She reached out. She took his hand by the wrist where it had fallen against his side. Her fingers closed around the fine wool of his cuff, the warm skin above it, the small, hard bite of his silver ring against her thumb. She did not pull him toward her. She did not lift his hand. She simply held it there, in the beeswax-scented passage, in the blue dusk coming through the open door behind her, and for a long, suspended breath, she did not let him go. He did not move. She had expected, perhaps, some small tightening, a flinch, a withdrawal, the 10-year composure reasserting itself. It did not come. What came instead was stranger and more undoing. His wrist, under her fingers, gave a single deep shiver, the kind of shiver that passes through a man who has been cold for a long time and has just stepped indoors. He did not attempt to hide it. He did not look away from her. He simply let her feel it through the fine wool of his cuff and waited. "Granger," he said, very quietly. "I know. I don't think you do. Tell me then." He did not speak at once. His gaze had moved, she realized, from her face to her hand on his wrist, not as though he were evaluating the touch, not as though he were hoping it would end, but as though he were trying to commit the arrangement of her fingers to memory, the way one committed to memory a book that might be taken away. "If you leave your hand there," he said, "for another minute, I will not be able to say afterwards that I was not warned. And I am trying very hard, Granger, not to be a man who was not warned. I'm not going to take it away." "No," he said, "I can see that." The warmth of the house had begun to rise around them. Somewhere in the depths of the passage, a clock chimed 6. The open door at her back still let in the blue cold of the drive, and she was aware, peripherally, of her own cloak gathering frost damp along its hem, of the scent of wet wool and wood smoke and beeswax, of the very faint smell of him, a cleanness she could not place, something like cold linen and green cardamom. With her free hand, she reached back and pushed the side door shut. It closed with a small, definite sound. The blue dusk went away. The passage was now lit only by the 2 brass lamps on their wrought hooks, low and warm, and the light of them caught on the silver at his cuff and at his throat, and on the faint scar at his jaw. She let go of his wrist. She did it slowly, so that he would understand it was not a retraction. And indeed, he did not move when her fingers slipped away. He simply stood where he was, with his hand still lowered at his side, and looked at her the way a man looks at a lantern he has been watching from a great distance, and has only just realized is close enough to touch. "I would like," she said, "to sit down, Malfoy. I have been on my feet since 7. I have received a ribbon and a song and a great deal of quince jelly, and I would like to sit down in a warm room with you, and I would like you to pour me something that is not tea. And then I would like to tell you several things, and I would like you to tell me several in return, and I would like us not, for an hour at least, to be careful." He breathed out. It was not quite a laugh. It was closer to the sound a man makes when he has been holding his breath without knowing it. "Yes," he said, "come with me." He led her, not to the long library, but to a small room off the south corridor she had not seen before. A study, perhaps. She could not tell. It had been a study once. It was now something he had made for himself. 2 deep leather chairs drawn close to a hearth where a low fire was already burning. A single round table between them with a decanter and 2 short, heavy glasses already set out. A tall, narrow window looking out onto the frost-silvered hedge, and the rest of the walls given over to shelves, full of books that were clearly his own, not inherited, arranged in the comfortable disorder of a reader who used them. There was no portrait in the room. She noted that quickly and did not remark on it. He took her cloak. He hung it. He did not do anything with his hands afterwards. He did not offer her his arm. He went instead to the table and unstoppered the decanter. "Fire whiskey," he said. "A Highland one. I could also offer you brandy, wine, cider. Tippy keeps a cider in the cellar that is, I think, older than either of us. Your preference?" "The whiskey. Thank you." He poured. He handed her the glass. This time his fingers did touch hers, very briefly, at the join of the glass. A brush, no more, no less. And she watched him see that he had done it, and not apologize. She sat in the chair nearer the fire. He took the other. Between them, on the little round table, The decanter caught the firelight and held it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire hissed once. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly. Tippy, perhaps, retiring for the evening with the tact of the very old. The window pane went on slowly, frosting at its edges. She drank. The whiskey was good. Smoke and peat and something under the smoke that was almost sweet. She set the glass down on her knee and kept her hand wrapped around it because the fire had not yet reached her fingers. "Several things," she said. "Yes. First, I am not going to apologize, Malfoy, for not having read the donor list. It was an oversight and it was a long one, but it was not a crime, and you are not owed an apology for a secret you deliberately kept. I want that said between us and finished." He inclined his head. "Granted. Second, I am not going to pretend I am not changed by what you have done. I am. I do not entirely understand yet in what way I am changed, but I am, and I will not hide it from you. I have hidden a great many things in the last 10 years from a great many people. I am not going to hide this from you. Granger, I have not finished." He closed his mouth. "Third," she said, "I do not know what I am to you, Malfoy. I know what I have been. A column of initials in a ledger, a postscript you remembered, a woman whose newsletter you have read for 11 years. I know what you have been to me, though I did not know I knew until very recently. I do not yet know what we are to be. I am telling you that I am willing to find out, slowly, with the deliberation of which you accused me in the library. But I am telling you that I am willing, and I am telling you tonight because I do not want you to spend another day at this desk imagining that I am not." He was silent. He had not drunk from his own glass. It sat untouched on the table between them, the whiskey in it holding a single point of firelight. "Granger," he said. "Yes. If you say another sentence like that, I will not behave myself." What a very old-fashioned thing to say. "I am an old-fashioned man. It is one of my very few remaining virtues. Please have some respect for it." She laughed. She did not know where the laugh came from. It startled her and it startled him. And then he laughed too, shortly, and the laughter was, in both of them, a little wet at the edges, and they did not look directly at one another for a moment while it settled. "All right," she said. "I will respect the virtue. Drink your whiskey, Malfoy." He drank. The small domestic discipline of the gesture steadied them both. She saw his shoulders come down by 1/4 of an inch. She felt her own hand relax its grip on her glass. The fire, which had been low, caught properly now on a fresh log that had not been fresh 5 minutes before. She suspected Tippy passing through without being seen. "My turn," he said. "Yes, I will be brief. You needn't be. I will, even so." He set his glass down. He looked at her across the small table, his hands loose on his knees now, his face open in a way she had not seen before, not unguarded exactly. Draco Malfoy was perhaps not capable of being unguarded, but with the guard lowered deliberately of his own will. "I have loved you, Granger, at varying intensities and with varying amounts of self-awareness, since approximately the summer of the year after the war. I did not know it at first. I thought I was paying penance. I thought I was tidying a conscience. It took me some years to understand that penance does not feel the way reading your newsletter felt. By then, I had been reading it for long enough that stopping was not an option I was willing to consider. I have not said this to you before, because I had made a decision as a much younger man that saying it to you would be a discourtesy. I am saying it to you now because you have asked me not to be careful for an hour, and because you have kept your hand on my wrist for longer than any woman has touched me in 10 years, and because I find that I am, in the end, not so old-fashioned that I can keep it to myself any longer. She did not answer at once. She could not. She drank, instead, a small measured sip, and she set the glass down on the table beside his, so that the two glasses stood side by side in the firelight. Malfoy, Granger, I am not going to say I love you. He did not flinch. He nodded once, as though he had expected the sentence and had already prepared to accept it. Not because I don't, she said. His eyes came up. But because I don't know yet whether I do, she said. And you of all people will understand why I am unwilling to say it until I do. You will not have a version of that sentence from me, Malfoy, that I have not verified. You will have to wait. I have had some practice at waiting. Yes, I know. I can wait for this as well. I know that too. She rose then. She did not know quite why she rose. Some small instinct, an instinct that had been with her all evening, since the blue dusk on the drive, since the wrought-iron gate, since the shelves in honey-waxed oak, was guiding her. And she had decided, somewhere between the whiskey and his confession, to stop arguing with it. He rose too, because a man of his training did not remain seated when a woman stood. They stood on either side of the little round table. The fire had found its proper warmth now. The room was lit in a low, rose-coloured glow, and the frost on the window was very white against the dark beyond. She could hear, distantly, her own heart, and she noted, clinically, that it was beating a little fast, but not unreasonably so. She noted also that his hands, which had been loose on his knees, were now carefully still at his sides, as though he had made a conscious decision not to move them. She stepped around the table. She did it without hurry. She did it in the way one crosses a room one has already crossed in one's mind. She stopped in front of him, close enough that she could feel the heat of the fire off his clothes, close enough that the cardamom and linen scent of him was no longer faint, and she looked up at him. He was very pale. His eyes were very dark. Malfoy, yes, I am going to do something, and I would like you not to be careful about it. He did not answer. His breath had gone shallow. His hand rose again, that small involuntary half-inch, and this time he did not lower it. It simply waited, suspended, for permission. Yes, he said. It came out almost soundless. She lifted her hand. She laid it very gently along the line of his jaw, her thumb against the faint scar at its edge, her fingers fitting to the cold shell of his ear. And she drew him down, not quickly, not urgently, only as one draws down a thing one has decided, at last, to have, and kissed him. It was not, at first, the kiss of people who had waited 10 years. It was quieter than that. It was the kiss of people who had agreed, silently, in the turning of a hand on a wrist and the lowering of a guard in a fire-lit room, to begin. Her mouth met his with a kind of careful deliberation, the same deliberation she had defended in his library, the same deliberation she had carried up the frost-silvered drive. And he received it the way he had received every unlooked-for gift in his life, with a stillness that was nothing like passivity and everything like attention. His hand, which had hovered so long at his side, finally moved. It did not seize. It did not gather her in. It settled at the curve of her waist with the lightness of a man setting a hand to the spine of a very old book, and rested there and asked nothing. She made a small sound against his mouth, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh, the sound of something in her chest that had been held closed for a long time and had, without fanfare, opened. And he answered it by drawing her, at last, the small additional inch that closed the distance between them entirely. She had thought, in the fraction of a second before she reached for him, that she knew what she was doing, that she had accounted for it, weighed it, authorized it. She discovered, within 2 breaths of his mouth against hers, that she had not accounted for any of it at all. She had accounted only for the decision. The thing itself was another country. He kissed her the way he had written to her, with attention, with discipline, with 1,000 small, unhurried acknowledgments of the fact that she was a person and not a prize. His thumb, at her waist, traced one slow, small arc against the wool of her dress, and then went still, as though he had remembered that he was permitted to touch her, and had decided, nonetheless, to use the permission sparingly. She felt the restraint and understood it for what it was. Not coldness, not distance, but a man who had waited 10 years and had resolved that his first hour would not be greedy. She was not, herself, inclined to be patient. She rose on the balls of her feet, fitted her other hand to the back of his neck, the cold silk of his hair under her fingers, the warmth of his skin beneath that, and kissed him properly. Not the careful opening of a minute ago. The kiss of a woman who had, finally, decided. He made a sound against her mouth that she would remember afterwards, whenever she was very tired and needed to remember something good. It was almost a laugh. It was almost a word. It was, in the end, only breath. But it was breath of a kind she had never heard from him, and she understood, with the clear, small jolt of the scholar who has just verified a hypothesis she had not dared to write down, that Draco Malfoy had been a very lonely man for a very long time. She did not let him go. When at last they drew back, it was by a hand's breadth only. He did not straighten. He remained bent toward her, his forehead almost against hers, his hand still at her waist. The other, she realized now, resting very lightly along the line of her jaw, where hers had been along his thumb not quite touching her lower lip. "Granger," he said. His voice was unsteady. "I find that I am, in fact, quite unable to be careful. I know. I am giving you fair warning. Malfoy, yes. You have given me fair warning for 10 years. I think we may, at this hour, consider the warnings concluded." He laughed then, properly, a short, undone, surprised laugh, and pressed his forehead against hers, and did not kiss her again at once, only stood with her in the firelight, with his breath unsteady and his hand at her waist, and she understood that he was not pausing from restraint, but from something more difficult, that a man who has imagined a thing for 10 years requires, on first having it, a moment to become a man who has it, rather than a man who imagines. She gave him the moment. When he lifted his head, his eyes were wet at the edges. He did not attempt to hide it. He did not apologize for it. He looked down at her with a face she had not, until that hour, been shown. The face beneath the face, the man beneath the composure. And she was glad that she had not said she loved him, because she understood now what the sentence was worth, and she was not going to spend it before it was true. "Come and sit," he said. "Drink your whiskey." "Is that what you want me to do?" "It is what I am capable at this moment of proposing. Later, I shall be capable of a great deal more. For now, Granger, please sit down, or I shall have to." She sat. He sat opposite her in his own chair, and she discovered that the small table between them was, now, no longer a distance. He reached across it without hesitation and took her hand. He put it palm up on the polished wood, and he laid his own hand over it, and that was the arrangement in which they remained for a very long time, while the fire burned down and they drank their whiskey and did not, for some while, speak. She did not go home that night. She did not, however, stay in the way a less deliberate woman might have stayed. They spoke until the fire had gone to red embers. They moved at some point to the kitchen, the manor's enormous main kitchen being shut and cold, but the small adjoining one, which Tippy kept, being warm and copper-lit. And Tippy, who was still awake and unsurprised, fed them bread and cold roast chicken, and a wedge of hard yellow cheese, and a small dish of her quince jelly, and would not accept thanks for it. They ate at the scrubbed pine table. He told her, in the way a man tells things late at night to a woman whose hand he has been holding for an hour, about the 10 years. Not the neatened version, the rough one. The first year in a small flat in Geneva, not speaking to anyone for weeks at a time. The second year, when his mother had made him take a job, an unpaid clerkship at a small magical library, shelving in the stacks, because she had said, with the quiet fierceness Hermione remembered from 1,000 battles, "You will not sit in a chair and become your father, Draco." The third year, when his mother had fallen ill. The fourth, when she had died. The fifth, when he had come back to the manor for the first time since the trials, and had stood in the long library and understood that he could not keep the books. "I could not keep them," he said, pouring her a small second glass of whiskey, because her first had not survived the roast chicken. "Because they were the books of men I did not want in the house any longer. Most of the volumes in that library were gifts from my great-grandfather to my grandfather, and from my grandfather to my father, and from my father to me. They were the library of a particular kind of man. I was no longer that man. I did not wish to leave them to a son who might become that man. A son. Hypothetically. Ah. I did not, Granger, mean. I know what you meant." He looked at her across the scrubbed pine table, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, and a great many things were said. She stayed in one of the 5 rooms he kept. It was not his. It had been, he said, a guest room that had been aired at intervals by Tippy for a decade in case a guest should arrive, although no guest ever had. The bed was made up with linen that smelled of lavender. The window looked out over a hedge on which the frost was now very thick. He left her at the door with a bow that was almost ceremonious, and an expression that was almost a smile, and he did not attempt to come in. And she did not, for one strange moment, know whether she was glad or disappointed. And then she understood that she was both, and that it was correct that she should be both, and she closed the door and went to bed and slept, for the first time in many years, without tea. In the morning there were letters waiting on the breakfast tray. Not letters from elsewhere, letters from him. 3 of them, written, she realized, in the small hours, because he had not been able to sleep either. She read them in bed, with a tray across her knees and Tippy's quince jelly on her toast, and she did not reply to them, because he was on the other side of the wall and would be, in 20 minutes, across the breakfast table. She replied to them, instead, 12 years later, when he found them in a drawer in their house, and asked her, with the dry, settled fondness she had grown by then very accustomed to, why she had kept 3 letters she had never answered. "I answered them," she said. "I just took my time. The prophet got the story eventually. It got it badly, and then it got it correctly, and then it got bored of it, which was what Hermione had counted on. Augusta Pusey was scandalized for a fortnight and reconciled in a month. Kingsley, who had, Hermione suspected, known the whole time, said only, over a cup of tea in his office, "My dear, I have been waiting for you to read your own donor list for about 8 years and would not be drawn further." Harry was slower to come round than Ron, which surprised no one more than Harry, and in the end was brought round by Lottie, who had opinions about Mr. Malfoy. He had, by that point, begun coming to the Hampstead house on Sunday afternoons to read aloud to the older children, and would not permit them to be contradicted. They did not marry quickly. They did not marry slowly either. They married, eventually, in the way people marry who have already agreed on everything important and require only an afternoon to make it public. It was a small ceremony in the wisteria-grown garden behind the manor on a June day with the bees very loud in the honeysuckle. Lottie was there. Augusta was there. Tippy was there, wearing a clean blue pillowcase with a small corsage pinned to it, and she cried more than anyone else and would not be embarrassed about it. The long library was, by then, no longer empty. Draco had begun slowly to fill it again, with books he and Hermione had chosen together. Nothing inherited, nothing owed, only the books they had decided between them that the house could stand to have. The painted sky still looked down with its slightly wrong constellations. The marble fireplace was lit more often now. Tippy brought tea on the same tray, and Hermione poured, and Draco drank, and the dust in the long bars of light was, these days, the dust of a room that was being used. A new column appeared in the Foundation's quarterly newsletter in the 2nd year after the opening of the Hampstead Reading Room. It was titled simply, "With Thanks," and it listed the names of the donors in full. First names, last names, no initials, no anonymities. Hermione had instituted the change herself, over the gentle objection of the accountant, who had found the initials tidier. "We will use the names," Hermione had said, in the small office in Hampstead, signing off on the first newsletter of the reformed column. "All of them, from now on. I want the names of the important ones, Mr. Parkes, to be the first thing the reader sees." At the top of the column, in the alphabetical order that the Foundation preferred, stood a single name that had once been only 2 letters. Draco Malfoy. With gratitude, as always. She had written it herself. She had read it before she signed it. And she had, for the first time in 11 years, read the name of the important one aloud.
Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story. I wanted to write about a quiet kind of love, not the loud kind, not the kind that shouts, the kind that waits, the kind that sings its name with only 2 letters and hopes someone one day will read them. I think many of us know this feeling. We all have people who love us quietly, people we do not always notice, and sometimes we are that person for someone else. Hermione needed 10 years to see Draco. Draco needed 10 years to let himself be seen. I do not think that is too long. Some things take the time they take. If this story touched you, please leave a like and tell me in the comments who is a quiet DM in your life. Thank you. I will see you in the next story.